Apart from that line, he also writes a few thrillers and frightens people with the scenarios of the world about people. And he's just written a new book called Democracy Killed, so you can read that later on. But Humphrey is here because he will, we can compare notes, and I'd like to hear his opinions as well. So when I was asked to speak, and I said, look, I'm no specialist, but I decided to look into how the media has been covering Iran. Yes. And I discovered really that people could read what they wanted in here because you consider the plural media. There is no one media. There is no one person smoking a pipe who's going to order that the British media or the Western media is going to go in this direction and everyone follows. There are 100 voices. And what I did is I read a lot and I also spoke to a whole range of people. So I thought I'd start with what I would probably say would be a standard, maybe conservative portrayal of this issue with Iran from the Daily Telegraph on the 26th of October. And where, there was an article where they said, we have been here before, but this time we are that much further down a dangerous road. For years, Iran has reacted to demands that it stop enriching uranium by a mixture of subterfuge and procrastination. Remember the revelation by an exiled opposition group in 2002 that was constructing 2 nuclear plants at Natanz and Iraq, and the fruitless round of talks between Tehran and Britain, France and Germany which followed. Today, America, China and Russia have joined the EU's big three, but Iran's pattern of behavior has remained the same. First, it failed to announce until last month the existence of a second uranium enrichment plant near Qom, facility in which Western intelligence agencies have been focusing since 2006. Second, having agreed in principle to export much of its low-enriched uranium to Russia for further enrichment and then to France for processing into fuel rods to be used to make medical isotopes, it has characteristically dragged its feet. It ignored last Friday's deadline for acceptance or rejection set by the International Atomic Energy Agency, and now says, and as we just heard from kasra, it was going to reply on Wednesday, and now will reply on Thursday. So that was this one strand of opinion, and you would find a lot of articles along those lines, depending on which publication you read or who you listened to. Then there was, what I found quite interesting, is that, I felt that probably various elements of the West were quite happy when they had a position where they could see Iran as the axis of evil. So it's very simple. You have the goodies and the baddies, and you have Libya, North Korea, Iran, fine, and they felt they were attacking. Then the elections happened. And suddenly they realized, oh goodness, things are slightly different. Now it's not so black and white. And then attitudes started changing. And so then I found an article, which was quite interesting, from someone in New York. It said, from enthusiasm to shock, Western media coverage of Iran's election. Perhaps not surprisingly, given the ballot results, there were 2 distinct narratives running through Western media coverage of the recent Iranian presidential election. The first of these narratives ran for a week or thereabouts, right up until election day, June 12th. Most of the international correspondents had arrived in Tehran by then and were filing stories highlighting the Iranian voters' enthusiasm for various candidates, and also the warm welcome the government had extended to the foreign media. The Iranian authorities presumably wanted to prove that there was such a thing as theocratic democracy. They were keen to see a strong turnout and a lot of media coverage in order to demonstrate their own legitimacy and strong electoral support for the government's policies and hardline stance against the West. So Iran was much more than just President Ahmadinejad, the narrative ran. Correspondents instead conveyed a hopeful mood in a country of diverse opinions. For the first time in more than a decade, Iran was given a human face. At that point, there were no complaints from the Iranian authorities about the role played by the foreign media, nor were there any allegations that foreign governments were trying to interfere with a vote or political campaigning. The trouble began when Ahmadinejad was declared the winner by a huge margin the day after the election, and opposition candidates alleged massive irregularities and fraud. The results were announced in huge blocks of votes and in percentages, as opposed to the region-by-region breakdown given in previous elections. Protests began building on the streets. Foreign reporters who had been expecting a close-run vote were shocked to find themselves reporting on rallies and demonstrations instead. So the Iranian government wanted to pretend that the 40 million people who participated in the election had backed the regime. It did not want to see a mass protest action on the streets of Iran with complaints of stolen elections beamed around the world by the visiting press corps. But I was speaking to a senior BBC editor today, and I mentioned to him that there had been some comments I'd read which had actually said that when with the results coming out, you found all the news emerging on Twitter or social networking sites, and some people were saying, actually, this is not a true reflection of what people thought. They said, you're talking really about the urban elite who communicate in English, and there was one theory saying that actually, Ahmadinejad supporters maybe come from rural areas, maybe they're not so quick and slick with using new technology, so did we get the balance right? So, people were questioning, and the questions were being asked, and I think this, although I know that the BBC Persian Online has been asked to leave Iran at the moment, but I think on the whole, the BBC has always tried to get at the facts, and there have been questions asked as to whether, people did get the right balance, whether they got too carried away. And I think there is always a danger, and I've noticed in our coverage of, say, China, Burma, and there was similar criticism when I was at the BBC, when the first, when there was first sort of euphoria and the protests became, and there was this whole thing of sympathy for all the protesters. And in the case of China, for example, a lot of people said that actually, if you remember, they were pro, when there was Tibetan protests, etc., they were saying, actually, don't think the media are actually showing some of the pro-government demonstrations. And I think, some elements within the media have tried to make sure that we always do have the balance. Now then we had, the government's side, which actually said, and there was someone who'd written, someone called Glenn Greenwald, and he said, despite all the rhetoric about Iran getting caught red-handed, it was Iran itself which notified the IAEA of this facility. The facility is far from operation, and there's no evidence that it contains or even can produce weapons-grade material. Until there's an IAEA inspection, which Iran said it would permit, it's impossible to know the true purpose and capabilities of this facility, which is the cause, they said, for the Chinese skepticism, and should cause skepticism among every thinking person, beginning with the American media. So it goes on in that level. Now I'll just quickly go on to our hand very quickly to Humphrey. Then I spoke to a dissident Iranian journalist, very senior, who actually felt, and a lot of people felt along those lines, that what the privilege of the West would have, even that you should have a meeting like this, shows that whatever you might criticize the West for, that you have a plurality of views and you can hear them. But what a few people have mentioned is that there was almost the other fear they had was that because after the election, because of Obama, because he's sort of slightly, as someone has already mentioned, is probably softly approached, that in the eagerness for people to get some deal on nuclear issues in Iran, people are forgetting the human rights abuses. So that's another. And very, very quickly, I'll say quick few points. Then we had, one British journalist who said, well, actually, when I told him I was coming to this, he said, can you put these questions, please? He said, why is it all right for the big five, USA, Russia, China, Britain, and France, to have nuclear weapons, warheads, but no one else? India and Pakistan have them, but no pressure is exerted on them. Why? Israel has an estimated 200 plus nuclear warheads. No one says anything about them. If the UN and major powers are remotely impartial, they would concentrate on forcing Israel to decommission its stockpile rather than trying to make Iran give up its enriched uranium production, which is not illegal. The anti-Iran pressure emanates from the USA, which wants to maintain an imbalance in the Middle East in favor of Israel. And I'd like Humphrey now to just give us a very quick thought.
Thank you, Rita. Since you've press ganged me into this, I'll be very quick, just expanding your points about the media and really how the world sees Iran. I mean, Iran, as the United States now, is going through a process. And the United States is going through the post-Bush process of deciding what sort of nation it wants to be in the world. Iran is going through probably a longer process, such as China and Russia is going through. And it has yet to identify the end point of that process. Now, during these processes throughout history, there are tripwires and flashpoints that start conflict. let me just concentrate very briefly on the China one. For many, many years, Taiwan in China was used as the trip point that would start a conflict and change the whole outlook of the Asia-Pacific in the World War.